Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Gail Whiteman, and I'm a professor and chair, a Rubin Chair in Sustainability at the new Pentland Center for Sustainability in Business that we just cut the ribbon only moments ago. So I'd like to welcome you this evening. We've got a packed house, which is great to see, for a very interesting public lecture that's organized by Lancaster University as part of our launch events. This is part of the public lecture series that's an ongoing and I think very successful set of events that Lancaster University does. And we are delighted to be part of it for what I think is a very provocative topic of how can companies be a force for good? I think this is a provocative topic because it's not always clear to people, including myself, even though I'm a business professor, that companies can be a force for good. We see in newspapers all kinds of stories, Volkswagen being the most recent with the scandal on the emissions gaming and fraud, essentially, that has happened. That's a company that had, for many years, positioned itself as a force for good. And in fact, 2 weeks before the emissions scandal erupted, had been awarded the Dow Jones Sustainability Index category winner for best sustainable performance in the automotive sector. We can now see that that, of course, was a misplaced award. And the question is, though, is Volkswagen the only one? Or under what conditions could a company like Volkswagen or many others actually be a force for good? Tonight we have some very engaging speakers from the private sector, so you're not going to hear about the academic side, but what you are going to hear about is really the inside track from business leaders on this really important topic. We're going to hold a lot of time open for questions because I'm hoping that you, the audience, will ask provocative questions and we can have a lively debate. Before I begin, I'd like to welcome Sir Chris Bonington and his partner Loreto. It's an honor to have you here, a former Chancellor of Lancaster University and, of course, a legendary UK mountaineer. He's also, interestingly enough, the non-executive chairman of Berghaus, one of the brands from the Pentland brand. So I think that perhaps we might ask you a question or two, Sir Chris. If we may, later on, I'll give you the heads up on that now. I would also like to welcome Stephen Decents, who is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research here at Lancaster University, and of course all of you. I think as an audience we've got a really mixed group and that makes me happy. Certainly I see some of my academic friends and colleagues in the audience, but I also see students, high school students, university students. I'm expecting questions especially from those of you at the youthful end of things. And I see that there's a lot of people in the community as well as hopefully some other business executives, so a warm welcome. The objectives are basically for all of us to explore the question of how can companies be a force for good. Now, I framed the question, and it's my fault if you think it's a leading question, and it certainly is, because I'm assuming here not can companies be a force for good. I'm assuming that they can, but the question is under what conditions? What kinds of conditions do we need to have? And certainly you can challenge the framing of that question. But enough about myself. What I'd like to do is introduce our first speaker, Andy Rubin, who is a chairman of Pentland Brands. Mr. Rubin is a very savvy businessman. He's Harvard educated and also a very strong sustainability leader. So I think that he will go through a lot of his personal insights over the next little while. And then we'll go to our next speaker, Dr. Rodney Urban, from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I'll introduce Rodney in more detail in a moment. But I do want to let you know that we've got two speakers. I'm honored to have both of them, especially given that I do know they had to travel from other places and the weather has been a little bit difficult in the last few days with Barney. I think, is this Barney? It was last week, it was Abigail. Is this maybe Lancaster weather, just a storm a week? Anyway, a warm welcome to Mr. Andy Rubin. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Whiteman. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Professor Whiteman is the new chair in sustainability, and she set us the task of trying to think about and answer this question. As the third generation in a family business that was established not far from here, in Liverpool in 1932, where my immigrant grandparents set up a small shoe business, I was brought up with some simple but powerful beliefs and values. Hard work, care for your employees, delight your customers, work as partners with your suppliers, be a good corporate citizen, and treat everyone with respect as if they're part of your extended family. The Archbishop of Westminster recently said that too many people in big business are living a divided life, ignoring the moral values that they uphold when with their families. Well, for us, there is no divided life. Our family and our business are one and the same, and the moral values are upheld across both. If this is how you are brought up, then being a force for good is relatively easy to understand because that's just the way it is. So why isn't every business or company a force for good? Why do we keep getting let down? Why were we let down by VW, by BP? Why were we let down by some bankers in the run-up to the credit crunch in 2008? Why did the departing CBI director, John Cridland, say in his interview with the FT last week, "It'll take 20 years to restore the public's trust in business so badly damaged by the financial crisis"? Before I address this, a quick review of good academic practice, defining the terms, and then a quick review of the literature. So defining the terms, I think, is fairly straightforward. I've already got this wrong, I realize, because Professor Whiteman said companies, I've said business. Business, I've changed the question already. Business is defined as an organization or economic system where goods and services are exchanged for one another or for money. Force is defined as strength or power of a group, and good defined as morally right, able to be trusted, a really important word. Turning to the review of the literature, it seems that the key debate is around why businesses exist and whether business leaders should focus solely on providing returns for shareholders or whether a broader group of stakeholders should be taken into account. In 2003, Jeff Smith summarized the shareholder versus stakeholder debate in the MIT Sloan Management Review. He wrote that shareholder theory asserts that shareholders advance capital to a company's managers, who are supposed to spend corporate funds only in ways that have been authorized by the shareholders. He quotes Milton Friedman, who wrote in 1970, "There is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud." Smith wrote that, unfortunately, shareholder theory is often misrepresented. It's sometimes misstated as urging managers to do anything you can to make a profit. Similarly, the stakeholder theory is sometimes misunderstood. It's sometimes claimed that the stakeholder theory does not demand that a company focus on profitability. Michael Porter and Mark Kramer in 2011 in the Harvard Business Review took the stakeholder theory forward by writing about creating shared value. But as they stated at the time, their understanding of shared value is in its genesis. Another important aspect of the literature relating to being a force for good is how ethics and culture impact performance. In 2014, the Chartered Management Institute in the UK commissioned research to assess the link between ethics in leadership and performance. Their overall conclusion was that strong ethics and high levels of organizational performance go hand in hand. So having defined our terms and briefly reviewed the literature, in the time remaining, I'd like to pose 3 questions. I'll also try to demonstrate that being a force for good pays back in multiple ways, and that whatever view you take, we actually don't have a choice due to the pressure we're putting our planet under. So to the 3 questions. Why have so many businesses been a force for bad rather than good? As referred to earlier, in 1970, Milton Friedman shone a spotlight on why businesses exist. He said simply, they exist solely to generate profit for shareholders. Writing in the New York Times, he wrote that businessmen that take seriously their responsibilities, note he said businessmen, in 1970, for providing employment, eliminating discrimination, avoiding pollution, are preaching pure and unadulterated socialism. he won the Nobel Prize. And the notion of creating shareholder value measured purely by share price performance was born. Since then, most businesses have followed his mantra, and stock markets have rewarded executives that solely deliver profit for their shareholders. Just this month, in the Sunday Times business section, there was a ranking of UK public company CEOs based only on the growth in share price relative to their pay. No other factors were taken into account. If CEOs don't focus on delivering profit for shareholders, within a short time frame, they're generally discredited and relieved of their post. The average tenure of a FTSE 100 CEO in the UK is 5 years. Patrick Hosking, writing in the Times, recently stated, "We tend to want to see profits too early. If Amazon had been a British company, Jeff Bezos, its founder, would have been sacked in the tech bust in 2000. Meanwhile, he's gone on to build one of the world's leading retailers." So if business leaders believe their sole responsibility is to deliver profit for shareholders in the short term, and the average tenure of a CEO is 5 years, it's no wonder that these business leaders don't feel compelled, and nor do they have time, to be a force for good. Turning to the second question, are there businesses leading the way as a force for good? If we look back, we can see that private enterprise has contributed hugely to progress in the Western world over 2 centuries. 200 years ago, 85% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, defined as less than $1 per day. That number is now 16%, as free enterprise and capitalism has created prosperity for billions. Average income per capita globally has increased 1,000% since 1800. In the past 200 years, average life expectancy has increased to 68, from its long historical average of 30 or less. In the past 40 years, the percentage of undernourished in the world has dropped from 26% to 13%. 84% of adults globally can now read. The top quartile of economically free countries has a life satisfaction index of 7.5 out of 10, compared to 4.7 for the bottom quartile. The inventions that have changed the world, automobiles, telephones, gasoline, antibiotics, computers, airlines, and the internet, didn't happen automatically or by government edict. They were the result of great entrepreneurs working in a free capitalist society. The school of thought that Friedman's narrow view does not truly reflect the role of business in society has been led by academics such as Professor Bill George at Harvard Business School, and business leaders such as John Mackey, the founder and CEO of Whole Foods, the American grocery chain. Mackey wrote, "While Friedman believed that taking care of customers, employees, and business philanthropy are means to the end of increasing investor profits, I take the opposite view. Making high profits is the means to the end of fulfilling Whole Foods' core business mission. We want to improve the health and well-being of everyone on the planet through higher quality foods and better nutrition. And we can't fulfill this mission unless we're highly profitable. Just as people can't live without eating, so a business cannot live without profits. But most people don't live to eat, and neither must businesses live just to make profits." Stephen Howard, CEO of Business in the Community, wrote recently, "There are a number of business leaders who I think history will judge kindly because of the lasting impact they have made. Although no longer at the helm of M&S, Sir Stuart Rose will forever be remembered for his passionate and sometimes bullish determination to embed Plan A into the core of M&S operations. In doing so, he completely turned on its head how businesses consider corporate responsibility." Unilever is a shining example of leading the way in being a force for good and making sure it pays for all stakeholders. they've set 3 goals to achieve by 2020. To help 1 billion people improve their health and well-being, to improve the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people in the supply chain, and to halve the environmental footprint of the group's products, whilst at the same time growing their business and increasing their profits. This is bold, ambitious, and brave, considering that Unilever is a publicly listed company. In our own business, we try to be a force for good internally and externally. Our purpose is building a family of brands for the world to love, generation after generation. It encourages long-term thinking. In 2012, we launched our 2020 strategy and, very importantly, included goals for both our financial measures and our non-financial measures. We provide a flexible, empowering environment which resulted in us being ranked as a great place to work by 88% of our employees in our most recent employee engagement survey. This includes the team in our warehouses. So it's not just about nice offices. We were awarded the CIPD's overall award in 2014 for people management in the UK. And they cited the fact that 98% of our people know and understand our purpose and our values. We were ranked in the top 10 in the UK by Glassdoor for work-life balance, a truly unfiltered website where employees can post whatever they like on their website. And we've developed our corporate responsibility strategy over time and integrated it into our core business strategy. It consists of 4 pillars: improving product sustainability, reducing our facilities' environmental footprint, ensuring ethical trade, and giving back to charity and our local communities. We know we can't change the world on our own, and we look to partner wherever we can leverage collective strength. We signed up to the UN's Global Compact. We are members of various industry groupings to effect change in the supply chain. We're currently working to introduce living wages in the countries where we manufacture. Very importantly, our business leaders are measured and compensated against the stakeholder theory and not just the shareholder theory. Put simply, they can't earn their bonuses unless all stakeholder initiatives are being considered, even if short-term financial performance is at or above expectations. So there are businesses working to be a force for good. There's also groupings of organizations inspiring businesses to be a force for good. At the highest level is the UN, who through its Sustainable Development Goals has attempted to set out a framework of key areas for countries, organizations, and businesses to focus on to make our world a more sustainable place. The original goals set up in Rio in 2000 were quite simple, and the big lofty ambition of halving poverty by 2015 was achieved. It proved that aligning agendas can pay off. However, the new Sustainable Development Goals, agreed in New York this last September, to take us out to the year 2030, number 17 goals in total, with 169 programs. This is the result of having to build consensus amongst the 193 UN member states. How can you not support such lofty ambitions as Goal 1, end poverty in all its forms everywhere? Goal 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Perhaps the challenge here is lack of awareness. Perhaps it's confusion about what specific action companies should take rather than the ambition. To this end, PwC, the professional services firm, have produced a very helpful report that helps businesses identify which of the 17 goals they should focus on. Across the top are particular industry sectors, and for each of those, it focuses on the few goals that are most relevant to them. Other groupings that I've come across that are inspiring businesses to be a force for good include B Lab, that certifies B corporations, B Team fronted by Richard Branson and Ratan Tata, the Conscious Capitalism group of companies, founded by John Mackey of Whole Foods and Professor Sisodia, an organization that I'm involved with called Leaders Quest, set up by British entrepreneur Lindsay Levin, a social enterprise that works with leaders to create a more equitable and sustainable world. And according to Professor Whiteman, the leading organization set up to inspire businesses to be a force for good is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And we'll be hearing from Rodney shortly about what they do. The third question, what more can we do to get more to be good than bad? A simple way to win the hearts and minds is to show them that being a force for good pays. Way back in 1992, Harvard Business School professors Cotter and Heskett published Corporate Culture and Performance. Their study concluded that companies with strong and flexible business cultures that addressed all stakeholders and empowered managers dramatically outperformed companies that did not on 3 financial measures. In their book, Firms of Endearment, Professor Raj Sisodia and others reviewed the performance of selected companies based on a total stakeholder approach. They found that by developing loyal employees and customers, and by caring for their communities, the companies chosen outperformed the market by a ratio of 9-to-1. A 2014 report by non-profit CDP provides some of the first evidence of a link between business leadership on climate change and a company's profitability. The study found that S&P 500 companies that build sustainability into their core strategies are outperforming those that fail to show leadership. Treating people well internally is also part of being a force for good. It pays. Just yesterday in the Financial Times special report on employee engagement, Glassdoor's chief economist wrote that if investors had bought shares in Glassdoor's top 50 best places to work in 2009 and sold the shares at the end of 2014, they would have outperformed the S&P 500 by 116%. So if we can clearly demonstrate that being a force for good pays, how can we encourage business leaders to start the journey? The CMI research in 2014 came up with 7 very clear recommendations. Encourage businesses to focus on purpose, values, leadership, and culture. The best performing organizations, says Anne Frank, the CMI CEO, have a purpose that serves others, not one that is self-serving for senior executives. Develop leaders, make decisions that are value-based, harness diversity, win hearts as well as minds, measure what really matters, and reward and recognize values-based behaviors. This is a very powerful set of recommendations that every business should measure themselves against. However, is it enough to win over the doubters and the short-termists? There must be more that we can do. There could be a more definitive academic framework for being a force for good, based on total stakeholder value. Perhaps the Pentland Centre for Sustainability could play a role in coordinating research. This could help businesses know what it means to be a force for good. We should do more to publicize the evidence that being a force for good pays. So what role can business play? Well, according to the Financial Times, $90 trillion will be invested in infrastructure for the world's energy systems, cities, and farm sectors over the next 15 years globally. If, at the forthcoming COP21 Paris meeting, it could help persuade investors and businesses to back the more climate-friendly projects, we could see emissions reduce. What more can we do to encourage businesses to be a force for good? We can inform and educate stock market investors and analysts. We can inform and educate the media. Let's try and get some balance between stories about force for good businesses and stories about force for bad. The recent Sunday Times ranking of UK CEOs, based only on share price performance, contrasts with the Harvard Business Review's ranking this month of global CEOs, including ESG factors for the first time. That's environmental, social, and governance factors. Their ranking was for the first time based on a formula which used financial returns for 80% of the score and ESG factors for 20%. The top-ranking CEO was Lars Sørensen of Novo Nordisk. What was perhaps the most interesting thing about their ranking was Warren Buffett, the sage of Omaha, and often regarded as one of the world's most successful business leaders, was ranked 101st. The article says that although financial returns have consistently been good at Berkshire Hathaway, where he's been CEO for 45 years, the disclosure on governance and social policies is poor, and their track record for addressing sustainability within its investee companies was weak. In conclusion, business leaders clearly have a choice. They can be a force for good if they choose to be. If we are to encourage more to follow this lead, then we need to align all stakeholders and ensure that measures and compensation for business leaders mirror good intentions. As Stephen Howard of Business in the Community wrote, to create a lasting legacy, CEOs should be thinking about the day they will walk out of their office for the last time right at the beginning of their role, and use their very first 100 days to consider how they can create a legacy that outlives their role. He continues, leaders must ask the right questions at board level and be brave enough to put long-term thinking and legacy on the boardroom agenda. And to quote the top-ranking CEO in the HBR study on financial and ESG factors, corporate social responsibility is nothing but maximizing the value of your company over a long period. In the long term, social and environmental issues become financial issues. I hope that you agree that business can be a force for good and that we can all work to ensure that it is stakeholder value that is being maximized with the broadest definition of who the stakeholders are. The evidence is overwhelming. Being a force for good pays back in every way. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Rodney Urban, who is Managing Director of the Redefining Value Program at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. He's also the Managing Director of WBCSD's Education Focus. He has a PhD in business ethics, so he's very knowledgeable on this subject, and he is also a chartered accountant, so he has the other side as well. So Rodney, please come up. Thank you.
Well, anybody that's ever studied accounting knows that for every debit, there needs to be a corresponding credit. So maybe that's why I've been to both the dark and the bright side. I hope I have slides. Let me see, does this work? Yeah. I put some slides together. It's always hard to know when you're doing or being asked to do something like this, whether you'll hit the tone. So if I go off script, it's sort of normal, and it'll maybe come back towards the end, so just to warn you. First of all, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's amazing to see so many people on a rather dark and miserable night to come and listen to somebody like me. So first of all, thank you very much. And also, absolute credit goes to Lancaster University for having the foresight for wanting to partner with a wonderful organisation like Pentland to create the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business. And without further ado, I need to tell you a little bit about the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or WBCSD. It's very easy to stand up here and sprout how wonderful businesses are. We all know that that's not the case. There are examples of good business, there are examples of pretty bad business activity that's going on in the world today. But I think to be able to put in context who I am and where I come from, you need to know a little bit about the organisation that I choose to work for. The WBCSD is about to come to the end of its 20th birthday. It's been officially a business association based in Geneva in Switzerland for the last 20 years, but it's been around a little bit longer, but not in an official capacity. And it was formed by an industrialist, a Swiss industrialist, who looked at what was happening in the geopolitical world and thought, business needs to sort of get itself organized, or we're going to end up dealing with the fallout of what the politicians will end up doing at Rio in 1992. So Mr. Schmidt-Heine, who was one of two brothers that inherited a large family-owned Swiss business, and again, family businesses are some of the more sustainable ones, pulled together his Rolodex, as it was back then. We didn't have smartphones. For those of you that are at high school, paper was the way. That he basically said, we need to start thinking about what is happening to this planet and to the people in it. And 20 years later, 25 years later, actually, we have the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We represent approximately 200 of the largest global companies, and the logos are the good and the great and the not so good and the great. We average about 9 trillion US dollars in aggregate revenues, so not particularly small. This slide was produced just before we got Walmart, so I think it's probably closer to the 20 million now in terms of employees. And through our global network partners, we operate not only out of Switzerland, but in 67 countries around the world. And these are the companies that are actively engaged within the WBCSD. And there are names up there that you probably will take a sharp intake of breath and think, really? I'm not going to highlight any because, everybody's got a past. I'm sure if we open some of your closets, you may find that you're in Narnia. So, yeah, we've got companies up there that produce alcohol. For some people, that's not a good thing. We've got companies that have a history of maybe producing chemicals that have been used inappropriately. We've got companies up there that would sell your mother. Or at least they would in the past. The difference is that the people that lead these businesses are starting to realize that that's no longer sustainable. And so I'm not going to stand up here and say I work for an organization that represents progressive business. What I am going to say is I work for an organization that encourages business to be sustainable. But not everybody here is on the same level of maturity. Some are starting. Some are a little bit across the start line. Some are a little bit further down that road. But if I were to say that what is sustainability? Sustainability for me is a marathon. And a vast number of businesses have yet to cross the start line. And some of the businesses on this page have started that journey, but it's a long journey. And as you heard from Mr. Rubens before me, there is lots of evidence to suggest that it's the right journey to be on. I'd actually just realized that a guy that examined me at Cambridge a few years ago is sitting in the third row, no pressure. So, hi. You probably don't remember me, but I certainly remember you. And it was an oral defense of a thesis, so hi. I passed. Anyway, so if the question is how, I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to stick to that. I want to present to you some reasons why business needs to be a force for good. And here we go. If the last 10 years has taught us anything, is that short-termism is not really a healthy thing. We have seen the crisis in the financial markets, and many of us have experienced them. I have a mortgage in Amsterdam that is way in excess of the value of the property. That's life. But when I bought it, it was an investment. Now it's a noose around my neck. And so for me, I have to live with that. Some of you may be in that situation as well. I don't know about you, but I'm from Ireland, so I'm used to the rain. But I'm not used to as much of it as we had this summer. I'm also, it's bizarre that the most attractive month of the year is now September. I'm not a scientist, far from it, but climate change is a reality, whether we like it or not. And in spite of what you hear on Fox News, science is right, not the ones that are paid by people who want us to believe otherwise. So we're seeing a change in the environment. And I think more importantly is that social tensions are increasing. And this has nothing to do with what we saw this weekend in Paris. It's nothing to do with religion. These are people taking to the streets because of economics. 38% of people in Spain are unemployed. You have to be almost in your late 30s to be able to get away from your family home because you just cannot get yourself into the property ladder or even a job. And, that's just not right. And we're on a trajectory at the moment which means that the population on this planet is not decreasing. It's getting bigger. And therefore, one might hazard a guess that the population is going to get bigger, the social tensions are going to get more frequent. The climate change is going to get more and more and more of an issue because everybody in this room has a responsibility to manage that. We all want to be consumers. And whilst we, on one hand, complain, we also are a little bit schizophrenic and do like the accountants do, balance that with consumerism. And, if we've learned anything is that economics is man-made invention that can actually blow up and be a really big issue for human beings on this planet. So business has a role to play in all of this. Business needs economics and is the fuel of economics. Business has pumped out tons and tons and tons of carbon into the environment. Business has cut down trees and pillaged the Earth's lungs to produce things that we want, even things in this room. And business employs people. So why is clear from these slides. So if the why is known, then what do business need to do? Why are we not all doing it? Why is there good? Why is there bad? And why is there, well, I don't really know. Well, within the WBCSD, business decided in the latter part of the last decade that they needed to think about a more long-term strategy. And so WBCSD's members, not the secretariat and the people like me that work there, but the members got together, I think about 36 of them, and said, how are we going to define the future we want? And what they came up with was what they called Vision 2050. We're in a business school and all of us have been taught that these sort of things are good, that you need little snippets here and there, but this is what Vision 2050 is for them. This is the vision statement. 9 billion people living well within the limits of the planet or the boundaries of the planet. Now, I'm an accountant. So I'm like, well, how do we know it's 9 billion? So in some slides, you'll see 9 plus, okay? Living well, by whose definition? Is it the American dream? Is it, well, I would love a house in the West End of London. That's my definition of living well, quite frankly. But, what does living well mean? Is it access to basic needs, basic rights? Is it all having a BMW? And, well, thankfully, we now know what the boundaries of the planet are. So this is business. But we're in a business school, and we're all taught about vision statements. The things about vision statements is that they are clearly visions. They're nothing more than a statement of intent. So this thing was published and looked lovely, but it never really moved until the change in leadership of the WBCSD, and this needed to become an actionable item. And that's what we moved into, to the how. So we had the vision, we need to move to the how. And this is the how. And this is, I think, the slide that, for me, is the most important, and the one that summarizes why the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business is in existence. We know from the pictures I showed you that there are reasons why the world needs to, or why business needs to change, why there are tensions in the world, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's economic, or whether it's of social origin. But as an accountant, I've been trained to deal in facts. And this is where academics add tremendous value, because your research should be fact-based. So if we take what happened in 2010, that vision already had changed by 2013 because there were emerging trends. Things had happened in that space that meant that some of those planetary boundaries were already becoming overstepped. And there was, 2010, we didn't have people on the streets. We didn't have people camping outside banks. We didn't have people, being turfed out on the street in many parts of Europe, not the rest of the world. But what these two facts and trends lead to is a science-based or an academic-based or an evidence-based list of priorities. So business and responsibility or philanthropy has always been very much in vogue. So we give a little bit here, we give a little bit there. It's always been superficial, And I'm not one to decry generosity and charity, but business needs to focus on priorities, and that's why business can be a force for good. Business needs information, and that's what institutions like this can provide. It can provide data and evidential foundation on which to build strategies. Because if these are the world's priorities, then we need to build the world's solutions to fix those priorities. And as an accountant, ka-ching, because we can have a win-win outcome. And that's where I believe business can add value and be a force for good. But we have a long way to go before that's the case. So we've moved from this visionary thing into the action perspective. We need to focus on goals that we can achieve. But we need to start to do things that perhaps has not been in vogue in the past. We need to collaborate. Business can compete, but it needs to compete on performance, not on methodology or on theory or on philosophy. And that's where we as a business council add value, because we bring people together from business in a pre-competitive space and get them to focus on solutions that the world needs, and then let them go off and do what business does well, which is compete. And the bit that's at the very end is sort of where I come into the equation. And one of the reasons why I think business is still not as advanced in this space as it could be is because the rules of the game within which businesses are being asked to behave do not encourage proactivity and do not encourage creativity. And in many cases, corporate governance is a shackle for many business leaders. I'm actually curious as to whether the people that run the business are really the CEOs or the lawyers. But where we are today with the way in which businesses have to report, within the way in which businesses are required to disclose, it's always backward-looking. Forward-looking is like putting a noose around your neck because somebody will sue you. So we need to change the rules of the game. We need to change the accounting rules so that we factor in the costs of society and the environment, because at the minute, business doesn't pay for any damage it does, nor does it get rewarded for any good that it does beyond its legal boundaries. So I do believe that the question posed by Gail is, for many businesses, an aspiration, but I go back to my analogy of the marathon. There's an awful lot of businesses that still have to start the journey. But I'm encouraged by the fact that here in this wonderful academic institution, and with the support of the Pentland company, that this centre is starting and will continue to push more people across that start line and maybe even get some of us closer to the end. Thank you very much.